There is a scene in Season 3 of Family Guy where Brian Griffin comes home from his first day working as a police drug sniffer and sits at the dinner table completely out of his mind on cocaine. He does not announce this, he just starts talking, too fast, his sentences running into each other and past each other, and the family watches him with the look of people who have not yet named what they are seeing, but already know something is wrong. The show plays it for laughs. It is funny, and underneath the funny, it is one of the most accurate pictures of early addiction that a cartoon has ever put on screen. Family Guy has been doing this for 20 years, hiding real things inside jokes, telling true stories about substances and dependency, and then cutting away before the weight fully lands. Most people think the show treats addiction as a punchline. Today, we're going to prove that it does not. Welcome to Red Umbrella. Let's get into it. The Drunken Clam as sacred space. Peter Griffin's alcoholism as identity. There is a bar in Quahog, Rhode Island called the Drunken Clam. Peter Griffin has been going there since the first season of Family Guy. He goes there after work, he goes there when something bad happens, he goes there when something good happens, he goes there when nothing happens at all. The bar is as much a part of his daily life as his house on Spooner Street, maybe more so, because at the Drunken Clam, Peter is never the problem, he is the point. Most shows that feature a character who drinks too much eventually build an episode around what that drinking costs him. Family Guy has done that. It has done it more than once, and we will get to every one of those moments. But before any of that, it is worth sitting with something the show established quietly and early and never really walked back. Peter Griffin without alcohol is not a better version of Peter Griffin. He is a worse one. The show decided this in Season 9 and has never seriously argued against it since. That is not a throwaway joke. That is a worldview. To understand what Family Guy actually believes about Peter and drinking, you have to look at the one episode that tried hardest to answer the question directly. Season 9, Episode 10, called Friends of Peter G., aired on February 13th, 2011. It was written by Brian Scully and directed by John Holmquist. In the episode, Peter and Brian get drunk and cause a scene at a movie theater. A judge sentences them both to 30 days of Alcoholics Anonymous. They go. They hate it. They secretly bring cases of beer to the next meeting and get every recovering alcoholic in the room drinking again. Joe shows up to investigate a noise complaint. The group disguises the community center as a church and performs a musical number called Mr. Booze to fool him into leaving. Then, Peter drives home drunk and crashes his car into a tree. He dies on impact. Death shows up, which is how Family Guy handles moments too heavy to play completely straight. Death gives Peter a second chance, but only after showing him two possible futures. In the first, Peter keeps drinking the way he has been drinking. He becomes abusive. He tortures his family. He has an affair with his boss, Angela. His home is filthy. His family is afraid of him. It is played as genuinely dark, not as a joke. Then, Peter asks to see what his life would look like if he had never touched alcohol at all. Death shows him that version too. Sober Peter has a different voice. He drinks milk. He spends time with different friends at the Drunken Clam. Careful, quiet men who Peter does not know, because in this version, he never bonded with Joe or Quagmire the way he did in real life. He looks at the actual Joe and Quagmire, the loud and messy ones he grew up next to, and finds them uncouth. He does not want to be around them. He has become someone who would not survive in his own neighborhood. Peter hates both versions. Death tells him the answer is moderation. Drink some, not all of it. Peter agrees. He is brought back to life. From that point on, every time he buys a six-pack, he throws 3 cans in the trash. The episode ends at a landfill where seagulls drink the discarded beer and get drunk. The show cannot stop itself from making the seagulls funny, but the point was already made. Sober Peter does not know his best friends. He does not recognize the people who matter most to him. The version of Peter that exists in the actual show, the one the audience has been watching for 9 seasons, only exists because of beer. That is the show's honest answer to its own question about Peter's drinking. It is not that drinking is fine. It is that for this specific man, alcohol is not separable from the relationships that give his life its shape. That is a more complicated position than most animated shows would touch. Now pull back a little further and look at the full picture of Peter's relationship with the Drunken Clam across the run of the show. The bar is where he processes everything. When something confuses him, he takes it to the Clam. When something hurts him, the Clam is where he lands. His friendship with Quagmire, Cleveland, and Joe exists almost entirely within those walls. The bar is not where Peter goes to drink. The bar is where Peter goes to be a person. Season 14, Episode 14, Underage Peter, which aired on February 21st, 2016, makes this explicit in a way the show rarely does. Mayor West raises the drinking age to 50 after Peter floods the local library by challenging himself to drink directly from a fire hydrant. Peter and his friends are suddenly legally barred from the one place that centers their lives. They try to leave town to drink. It does not work. They try to find other options. Nothing fits. Eventually, they discover that Brian, because of dog years, counts as old enough to buy alcohol, and they make make him their supplier. The episode spends its whole running time treating access to alcohol as something Peter is genuinely owed. Not because he needs it to function, but because the law taking away his ability to drink is the law taking away something essential to who he is. In the end, Peter overturns the law. The drinking age goes back down. The story resolves as a win for Peter. That framing is worth sitting with. The show positions the reinstatement of Peter's ability to drink freely as a victory. His friends celebrate. The normal order is restored. Nobody involved in the episode, not the writers, not the other characters, not the show itself, treats the return to heavy drinking as anything other than the correct outcome. Compare that to what the show does in season 23. In an episode called Fahrenheit 451, Peter and his friends give up drinking entirely after blacking out hard enough to accidentally marry each other on back-to-back nights. For a stretch of the episode, Peter is sober, and the show plays his sobriety as a problem. His family is reportedly relieved when he starts drinking again, because the sober version of Peter is too cheerful, too strange, too difficult to be around. This is the show, 14 seasons after Friends, of Peter G. reversing its own position. Friends of Peter G. argued that moderation was possible and desirable. Fahrenheit 451 argues that Peter without alcohol is so uncomfortable for the people around him that his family actually prefers the alcoholic version. The moral framework built in 2011 is quietly abandoned in 2025, and no one in the show acknowledges that the shift happened. The reset is not an accident. It is how long-running animated shows survive. Every season has to be able to do something with Peter's drinking, which means the drinking can never actually change. He cannot get genuinely sober, because a sober Peter is, by the show's own established logic, a different person. He cannot become a fully destructive drunk, because that closes off too many stories. He has to stay exactly where he is, drinking too much, occasionally confronting it, never sustaining any position long enough for it to cost him anything permanent. Horace, the bartender at the Drunken Clam, keeps a poster of Peter on the wall of the bar. The poster has a quote under Peter's face. The quote says, "Most likely person to get drunk." This is presented in the show as an honor. Peter's response to seeing it is not embarrassment, it is pride. The bar recognizes him for the one thing he does there most consistently, and he accepts that recognition as a legitimate form of belonging. That detail does something specific. It moves Peter's drinking out of the category of habit and into the category of identity. He is not a man who drinks too much. He is a man whose place in his community is partly defined by how much he drinks. The Drunken Clam does not just tolerate his drinking, it celebrates it. And in a town like Quahog, where social life runs almost entirely through that bar, the man who drinks the most is also, in a way, the man who shows up the most. That is the trick the show has been running since season 1. Peter's alcoholism is presented as social participation. Every beer is a reason to be at the Clam. Every round is a round with Joe and Quagmire and Cleveland, men he would not know, as the show itself confirmed, without the drinking that brought them together. The bar is the glue that holds his social world in place, and the drinking is what gives him access to the bar. Most addiction stories are about a person who loses something because of what they use. Peter's story is built on the opposite premise. He gained almost everything because of what he drinks. His friendships, his social confidence, his ability to be funny and loose and present in a way that sober Peter, the milk-drinking stranger, never could be. The show does not ask you to admire this, but it does not ask you to condemn it either. It presents it, season after season, as simply the way things are in Quahog. And here is what makes it interesting. The show is not blind to the cost. It has depicted drunk Peter causing car accidents, flooding public buildings, destroying property, putting his family in danger. Friends of Peter G. showed his worst possible future with total seriousness. The show knows what heavy drinking does. It just keeps deciding, season after season, that the answer is not to change Peter. The answer is to change the episode and come back next week. That decision is not laziness, or not only laziness. It is the show operating according to its own deep logic. Peter Griffin is the Drunken Clam's most loyal customer because the Drunken Clam is the place where Peter Griffin most fully exists. Take away the bar and you get the milk-drinking stranger death showed him. Keep the bar and you get Peter, messy, dangerous, ridiculous Peter, but also the only Peter anyone in Quahog has ever actually known. The show decided a long time ago which version it preferred. What it never decided is why it prefers it. And that question, whether Family Guy endorses Peter's drinking or simply cannot figure out how to do without it, is going to follow every other addiction story the show has ever told, starting with the one that came first. In season 3, a dog with a cocaine problem walked back through the front door after the show's first cancellation, and the story he brought with him was not about vice or excess or or bad decisions. It was about what happens when a person has run out of reasons to get out of bed in the morning. Section 2. The Thin White Line. Brian's cocaine addiction and the void beneath the pretension. S3E1. Brian Griffin is a dog who drinks wine. That detail matters more than it sounds like it does. The wine is not incidental. It is not a background prop or a running visual joke the show forgot to retire. It is a signal, one the show established early and has maintained across more than 20 seasons, that Brian is the kind of person who considers himself above his surroundings. He drinks wine because beer is what Peter drinks, and Brian has spent his entire life trying to be the opposite of Peter. He reads books. He writes novels that do not sell. He talks about politics at the dinner table. He corrects people. He is the smartest person in most rooms he enters, and he needs you to know that. And underneath all of it, he is a dog living in someone else's house without a real job or a finished manuscript or a single completed version of the life he keeps insisting he is capable of living. The wine is how he papers over the gap between who he believes he is and what he has actually managed to become. Season 3 of Family Guy opened on July 11th, 2001, with an episode called The Thin White Line. It was the first episode to air after the show was brought back following its first cancellation, and it was written during the second production season with the production code 2ACX-17. The show came back through a combination of DVD sales and Adult Swim reruns that proved the audience was still there even after Fox had given up. The writers knew they were getting another chance. The episode they chose to open with was a cocaine story about a dog who had run out of reasons to feel anything. Brian tells his therapist at the start of the episode that he is in an emotional rut. That is the phrase he uses. Emotional rut. It is a calm, self-aware, therapy-ready phrase. The kind of language someone uses when they want to appear to be dealing with something without actually dealing with it. His therapist suggests he might be too focused on himself and recommends he try volunteering. Brian takes the advice. He signs up to be a guide dog for a blind man. He sits in movie theaters describing what is happening on screen in a flat, bored tone. He tries other volunteer work. Nothing sticks. Nothing gives him the feeling he is looking for, which is never quite named in the episode but is recognizable anyway. The feeling that his life has weight. Then Joe Swanson gives him the chance to work as a drug-sniffing dog for the Quahog Police Department. Something clicks. Brian is genuinely good at it. On his first day working airport security, he tracks down a suitcase packed with cocaine. He finds it effortlessly, the way some people find things they were always meant to do. For a stretch of the episode, Brian looks like a man who has found his purpose. He comes home energized. He talks about the job with real enthusiasm, the kind that cuts through his usual layer of ironic remove. He is present in a way the show has not shown him being before. And then he snorts the cocaine. The show does not build to this moment dramatically. It happens the way most bad decisions happen in real life. Quickly, almost accidentally, with no music swelling and no character pausing to consider what they are about to do. Brian is at the airport. There is cocaine in front of him. He leans in. That is the whole sequence. What follows is one of the most specific depictions of stimulant behavior the show has produced. Brian comes home from work wound tight and talking fast, his sentences running over each other, his energy crammed into a body that cannot contain it. He sits at the dinner table and delivers a monologue about his day that starts as excitement and tips quickly into something else. He talks about a drug bust involving a man who hid cocaine in his daughter's doll, and his outrage at this, where is the line anymore, is real and escalating and completely disconnected from the fact that Brian himself just snorted cocaine in an airport. The gap between what he is saying and what he is doing is the joke, but it is also the portrait. This is what addiction looks like in its early stage. Total inability to see yourself from the outside. His behavior gets worse. He grows erratic. He shows up places high. The family notices. The show does not drag this out across multiple episodes or turn it into a slow burn story. Brian's cocaine use, his family's concern, and his agreement to enter rehab all happen within a single episode, which is true to the show's format, but also, accidentally, true to how families often respond to addiction. All at once, in a rush. Once the thing that was being ignored can no longer be ignored. The intervention scene is quiet. Brian cries. Stewie, never one to let an emotional moment pass without a joke, calls him a melancholy, a pun on melancholy and collie, a breed of dog. Everyone stares at him with disappointed looks. Even Stewie's second attempt at a joke falls flat. The room stays heavy. That is unusual for this show. Family Guy does not often let emotional weight sit without cutting away from it, and the fact that it lets the intervention breathe, that it does not immediately undercut it with a gag, suggests the writers knew they were doing something worth treating with some care. Brian goes to rehab. Peter, who was supposed to go on a family cruise before Brian's situation canceled the trip, fakes a drug addiction to stay at the rehab facility instead. He wants the amenities. He treats the clinic like a resort. His presence is absurd, which is exactly the point. Peter's version of engaging with Brian's addiction is to turn it into a vacation opportunity. The show is not subtle about this. Peter has no idea what Brian is actually going through. His obliviousness is not malicious. It is just complete. Then the rehab doctor does something that changes everything. The doctor, after watching Peter derail the facility's routines and drag Brian back into his orbit, announces that Peter is the X factor, the underlying cause of Brian's addiction. The theory is that Brian's emotional chaos, his lack of direction, his inability to settle into any version of his own life, can be traced back to the destabilizing influence of living in the Griffin household and being Peter's closest companion. Brian rejects this so completely and so immediately that he checks himself out of rehab to prove it is wrong. Read that again slowly. Brian leaves the treatment program he voluntarily entered before completing it because a doctor suggested that his addiction might have an external cause. Brian cannot accept that explanation because accepting it would mean that his problem is partly someone else's fault, and Brian's entire self-image is built on the idea that he is a self-determining, intelligent, autonomous individual who makes choices based on reason. If Peter made him an addict, then Brian is not in control of his own story. That is a more threatening idea to Brian than the cocaine was. So he leaves. He walks out. He tells the family that his experience in rehab has shown him that everyone is responsible for their own destiny. He hails a cab. He drives to the airport. He flies somewhere. The family watches him go, too stunned to stop him, and the episode ends with a card reading, "To be continued, July 13th, 2000. Brian does not get better at the end of the thin white line. He gets out. Those are different things, and the show knows they are different things, and it chooses to end the episode on that distinction rather than give Brian or the audience the satisfaction of a clean resolution. The thing about Brian's cocaine arc is that it was never really about cocaine. The cocaine was the easiest part of the story. Brian found it, used it, got caught, agreed to get help, and left treatment early. That whole chain of events fits inside 22 minutes of television. What does not fit inside 22 minutes, what the show gestures at and then leaves unresolved, is the question of why Brian needed something to fill the void in the first place. His therapist told him at the start of the episode that he was too focused on himself. That is a gentle way of saying that Brian has built a life oriented entirely inward, a life where his own feelings and disappointments and frustrated ambitions take up so much space that there is no room for anything else. The volunteer work his therapist suggested was supposed to fix this. Connect with other people. Get out of your own head. Brian tried it. It did not work. Nothing worked until the cocaine. Because the cocaine was the first thing that made him feel like his life had momentum without requiring him to actually build anything. That is what the cocaine was doing. It was not making Brian happy. It was making him feel like he was moving. This is a more honest thing for a cartoon to say about stimulant use than most serious dramas manage. The conventional addiction story is about a character who feels good on the substance and needs to learn that the good feeling is an illusion. Brian's story is about a character who feels purposeful on the substance, who feels, for the first time in a long time, like someone going somewhere. The loss is not the high. The loss is the direction. It explains why nothing the writers gave him afterward ever quite stuck. Brian has a novel he cannot finish. He has a writing career that produces one published book, which sells 0 copies, across 2 decades of trying. He has relationships that fall apart. He has opinions he performs rather than believes. He is a figure defined almost entirely by the gap between his self-image and his actual output, and he has been living inside that gap since the show began. The cocaine did not create that gap. It just made him comfortable enough to stop noticing it for a while. When Brian leaves rehab at the end of the episode, he is not cured. He is not even particularly different. He is just moving again, which is the closest thing to peace he knows how to find. He will carry the wine glass through the rest of the series. He will chase other things, Adderall, other women, other schemes, and every one of them will be some version of the same search. He is always looking for the thing that makes the gap disappear, and nothing ever does. And the show depicts this with enough consistency that it begins to feel less like a character flaw and more like the central fact of who Brian Griffin is. The episode established something that the show never quite let go of. Brian does not use substances because he is reckless, or because he is weak, or because he lacks self-awareness. He uses them because he has too much self-awareness, and the gap it reveals is more than he knows how to live with sober. The cocaine was, in its way, a solution to a problem the show never actually named. It just showed you the problem, let it breathe for 22 minutes, and sent Brian to the airport. What comes next for Brian is not recovery. It is a long, slow demonstration of what a person looks like when they replace one crutch with another. and another and another, trying every available version of escape without ever addressing the thing they are escaping from. But before we get deeper into Brian's pattern, there is a character who does something no one in Family Guy usually does when it comes to addiction. He quits. He makes a decision right there in the middle of an episode to never touch alcohol again. He means it completely. And within the next scene, he is smoking crack cocaine on the floor of his living room, clutching a couch cushion, screaming about the government taking his baby. __quote _2 __. That character is Peter Griffin, and the story of how he got from sobriety to crack in under 2 minutes is one of the most honest things this show has ever accidentally said about how addiction actually works. Section 3. Peter quits beer for crack. Quote 3. And addiction displacement. S5E10. Peter Griffin is not a man who does things halfway. When he eats until something breaks. When he fights a giant chicken across multiple episodes and multiple seasons for reasons neither he nor the chicken can fully remember. When he decides to fix a problem, he fixes it with the kind of total commitment that bypasses every reasonable middle step and lands directly on the most extreme available option. This is who Peter is. It is also, when you apply it to substance use, exactly the kind of thinking that turns one bad decision into a much worse one. Season 5, Episode 10 of Family Guy, called Peter's Two Dads, aired on February 11th, 2007. The production code is 5ACX-05. The episode begins at Meg's 17th birthday party, where Peter shows up dressed as a clown. What happens next is an accident. Peter does not intend to kill Francis Griffin, his deeply religious, deeply disapproving adoptive father. But Francis dies anyway, and the weight of that lands on Peter in a way the show does not immediately try to make funny. Francis was difficult. He was critical and cold and consistently made Peter feel small. He also raised Peter as his own son while knowing, for years, that Peter was not biologically his. The show holds both of those things at once, and Brian even points this out directly. Whatever else Francis was, he loved Peter enough to raise him. That is not nothing. Peter blames the alcohol. This is the moment the episode pivots from a story about loss into something more specific. Peter watches his father die at a birthday party, and his brain finds a direct line between the beer in his hand and the man on the ground. The logic is not sound. The alcohol did not kill Francis. But grief does not run on sound logic, and Peter, in his pain, makes a decision with the full force of his personality behind it. He is never drinking again. He says it, and he means it, completely, in the way Peter always means things completely. Brian, who knows Peter better than almost anyone, does not celebrate this decision. He does not say, "That sounds great," or "I am proud of you." He accepts it the way a person accepts news they already know will not end well, which is quietly and without much comment. What happens next takes approximately one scene to unfold. Brian goes to check on Peter. He walks into the room, expecting to find his friend in some state of grief-adjacent sobriety. What he finds instead is Peter on the floor, shirtless, wrapped around a couch cushion, completely out of his mind on crack cocaine. Peter looks up at Brian and screams, in a voice that has lost all connection to normal speech. "Government came and took my baby." Brian's response is one word. It is bleeped out on television, but everyone watching knows exactly what Brian says. And the reason it lands so hard is that it is not a comedy reaction. It is a genuine one. Brian is not performing shock for laughs. He is actually horrified. And that horror, coming from a character who has seen a great deal of strange behavior in the Griffin household, signals to the audience that what they are watching is not a normal Peter moment. This is something different. Peter's explanation, when it comes, is delivered with complete sincerity. He promised he would stop drinking. He did stop drinking. He is not drinking right now. Therefore, he is keeping his promise. The crack is beside the point, because he specifically said no more drinking, and crack is not drinking, so technically he has not broken his word at all. This is the logic of a person whose relationship with a substance is so deeply wired into how they function that removing the substance does not create a clean space. It creates a vacuum that immediately needs to be filled with something else. Peter did not quit drinking because he examined his relationship with alcohol and decided he wanted a different life. He quit drinking because he was in pain and needed something to blame for the pain, and alcohol was the closest available target. The quitting was not recovery. It was just redirection. The show has a name for this in its own script. Brian says, at the moment he finds Peter on the floor, that crack is not a good substitute. The word substitute is doing important work there. It acknowledges, in one word, that Peter was looking for a replacement rather than a change. The addiction did not stop when the drinking stopped. It found a new address. What the episode is depicting, and depicting accurately, even inside its comedic framing, is something that happens constantly in real patterns of substance use. A person person gives up one thing and picks up another, often something worse, because the original problem was never about the specific substance. It was about the feeling the substance was providing. Peter drank because alcohol made being Peter easier. It smoothed out the rough edges. It gave him access to the drunken Clam and his friendships and the loose, confident version of himself that lived inside a bar. When he took the alcohol away, without addressing any of that, the need did not disappear. It just looked around for the next available option. Crack cocaine is a significant jump from beer. That jump is intentional. The show is not being subtle. It is making the point as visibly as possible that the logic of substitution is not a safe logic, and that a person who tells themselves they are beating one habit by picking up another has not beaten anything at all. Brian says this directly, not in a speech, not in a long conversation, just in that one flat statement. That is not a good substitute. And then the scene moves on. The show does not stage an intervention. It does not spend time on the dangers of crack cocaine in any educational way. It presents the situation, lets Brian register appropriate alarm, and continues with the episode. This is worth examining. The show chose not to treat Peter's crack use as a full story. It is a scene, not a plot. The actual plot of the episode is about the paternity revelation. Peter discovers during his visit to a hypnotherapist named Bruce that Francis was not his biological father. His real father is a man named Mickey McFinnigan, an Irish drinker who had a one-night encounter with Peter's mother Thelma years before she married Francis. The crack cocaine is a detour on the way to that larger revelation. But look at what the show did by placing the crack scene where it placed it. Peter quits drinking because Francis dies. The quitting leads immediately to crack. Then, the story reveals that Peter's biological father is an Irish alcoholic. The genetic line from Mickey McFinnigan to Peter Griffin is drawn in the same episode where Peter demonstrates that he cannot stop using substances even when he genuinely tries to. The show is not making this connection out loud. It never says, look, your father was an addict, and here you are, unable to function without something in your system. But it puts those two facts in the same episode and trusts that the audience can see what is being drawn. Mickey McFinnigan, when Peter eventually meets him in Ireland, is exactly what the show telegraphed he would be. He is large, loud, and drinks constantly. He is charming in the specific way of people who use charm as a survival tool. His best friend, the character who stays closest to him and helps him navigate his own bad decisions, is described as an intelligent, snarky animal, which is the exact description you would give of Brian's role in Peter's life. The show is pointing at something. Peter did not develop his relationship with alcohol in a vacuum. He came from someone, and that someone looks, in almost every relevant way, like a slightly older version of the same problem. The episode resolves the paternity question with a drinking contest between Peter and Mickey. They drink against each other to determine whether Mickey is truly Peter's father, since the presumption is that Peter's real father would be able to keep up with him. The contest ends with both of them barely conscious, the subtitles reduced to question marks because neither man can form a coherent word anymore. The show frames this as the moment of connection between father and son. The thing that proves they are related is how much they can drink together. Think about what that means. The biological bond between Peter and his real father is confirmed not through a DNA test or an emotional conversation or any of the expected story beats, but through shared capacity for alcohol. Their relationship begins with drinking. In a show that also contains the Drunken Clam sequence from Friends of Peter G, where alcohol is the thing that connected Peter to all his closest friends, this is consistent. Drinking, in Peter's world, is how connection happens. It is the language people use to say, I am like you. I belong here. The crack cocaine scene does not come back up. After Brian registers his alarm and the episode moves toward the Mickey McFinnigan story, Peter's crack use is dropped entirely. He is not shown dealing with it. He does not appear to go through any period of stopping. The next scene features Peter functioning normally, pursuing the paternity plot. The show does not explain how Peter went from shirtless on the floor screaming about the government to operating as a regular character again. This is the reset at work, the same pattern that runs through every addiction story in this show. The moment happens, the moment lands, the episode moves on. Whatever consequence should logically follow is absorbed by the gap between scenes, and by the time you notice it is missing, the story is already somewhere else. What stays, though, even after the reset, is the image. Peter on the floor, shirtless, clutching the cushion, screaming. Brian in the doorway with a look that is not funny. The show deposited that image into its history, and it does not fully go away, even after the episode ends and normal service resumes. It sits there as evidence of what Peter Griffin looks like when you take away the specific substance and leave the need intact. The need is the actual problem. The beer was just the form it had taken. Remove the beer, and the need does not retire. It improvises. This is the most honest thing Peter's Two Dads says, and it says it in a single scene, without commentary, and then moves on to Ireland. But the honesty is real. Regardless of how quickly the show walks away from it, Peter could not quit. Not because he lacked willpower, or because he was weak, or because Francis did not mean enough to him. He could not quit because quitting the substance without addressing the thing underneath the substance is not quitting. It is just switching. Brian knew this. His one-line response told you he knew it. The show knew it too, which is why it staged the crack scene so specifically. The shirtlessness, the cushion, the babbling about the government, all of it designed to look as far as possible from the composed, functioning person Peter is when drinking. The point was not that crack is worse than beer, though it obviously is. The point was that a person running from something will always find something to run to. And here is the thing about all of this that the next section will make clearer. Family Guy eventually tried to address Peter's drinking directly, not as a side story, not as a single scene inside a bigger episode, but as the entire point of an episode. It brought in Death himself to make the argument. It gave Peter a full supernatural tour of his worst possible future. It ended with a moral position that the show actually seemed to mean. __quote _4 __. And the way it built that episode, the specific choices it made about how to present the cost of Peter's drinking and what the alternative would look like, reveals something about what Family Guy believes that no other episode in the series makes quite as clear. Section 4. Friends of Peter G. The only episode that tried to mean it. Season 9, Episode 10. Family Guy has told a lot of addiction stories. Most of them are built the same way. A character picks up a substance, the substance causes problems, the problems are funny, the episode ends, and next week everything is back to normal. The show is honest enough about what it is doing that it rarely even pretends the reset will not happen. You watch the addiction episode, you laugh at the addiction episode, and you understand without being told that none of this will matter by the following Tuesday. Friends of Peter G. is different. Not completely different. The reset still happens. The show still cannot fully commit to the weight of what it is depicting, but different enough that it stands apart from everything else in the show's run on this particular subject. It is the episode that tried hardest to mean something. And the fact that it tried, and the specific way it tried, and the exact moment where it pulled back from going all the way, tells you more about what Family Guy actually believes about addiction than any other 22 minutes of television the show has produced. Season 9, Episode 10, aired February 13th, 2011, written by Brian Scully, directed by John Holmquist. The episode was first announced publicly at the 2010 San Diego Comic-Con by Seth MacFarlane himself. The composer Walter Murphy, who has worked on Family Guy since the very beginning, returned to write the music. It was viewed in 5.99 million homes on its original airing. The episode opens with Peter and Brian at a movie theater. They are drunk. They cause a disruption loud enough that it becomes a legal matter, and a judge sentences them both to 30 days of Alcoholics Anonymous attendance. Not as a punishment that costs them anything physically, not jail time, not community service in any traditional sense. 30 days of sitting in a room and listening to other people talk about their problems with alcohol. Peter and Brian treat this as an insult. Brian's argument against AA is delivered with the full confidence of someone who has thought the matter through carefully. He tells Lois that AA has not really helped people over the years. He says that people will just become addicted to AA instead of alcohol. He presents this as a logical position. He is not embarrassed by it. He genuinely believes, or performs believing, that the problem with AA is that it asks people to give up drinking. And giving up drinking is an overreaction to what is really a very manageable situation. This is the show being precise about Brian in a way it does not always get credit for. Brian's argument against AA is not a joke the writers invented because it was funny. It is the exact argument a person makes when they are intelligent enough to construct a defense of their own behavior, but not honest enough to examine what they are defending. Brian talks himself into and out of everything. He has been doing it since the first season. His objection to AA is the same muscle working in the same way, finding the cleverest available framing for the position he already wanted to hold, which is that his drinking is not something anyone else gets to have an opinion about. They go to the first meeting. The people there share stories about how alcohol has damaged their lives. Peter and Brian find this depressing. Not sad in a way that moves them. Depressing in the way a long drive with no music is depressing. Just an experience they want to end. By the second meeting, they have brought several cases of beer and are encouraging the recovering alcoholics in the room to drink with them. Everyone does. The meeting, which was supposed to be a space where people help each other stay away from the thing that has hurt them, becomes a party. Joe shows up to investigate the noise. What follows is one of the most discussed sequences in the episode. episode. Peter leads the group in a performance of a song called Mr. Booze. The song was originally written by Sammy Cahn and Jimmy Van Heusen and performed in the 1964 film Robin and the Seven Hoods, which starred Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Bing Crosby, and Sammy Davis Jr. Family Guy's version is arranged by Mark Mothersbaugh and performed by Seth MacFarlane and the episode's guest cast, including Phil Lamar and H. John Benjamin. The performance is used to disguise the drinking party as a church service so that Joe will leave without issuing a citation. The lyrics of Mr. Booze are anti-alcohol. The song warns about what drinking does to a person. It describes how lives are ruined. It is, on paper, exactly the kind of message the episode is supposed to be delivering. But the show performs it inside a scene where the people singing it have just been talked back into drinking by the two main characters, which means the anti-alcohol message is being sung by a room full of relapsing alcoholics as a cover story to fool a police officer. The irony is thick enough to cut through, and the show is aware of it. This is a deliberate choice, not an accident. But the result is that a genuinely moving piece of music gets turned into a punchline, and the punchline works, and everyone who watches it laughs, and the moral content of the song dissolves inside the comedy of the situation. This is the moment where Friends of Peter G reveals its limits. The show wants to say something true about drinking. It also wants the Mr. Booze performance to be funny. It cannot fully have both, and when it has to choose, it chooses funny. Which is not a criticism. Family Guy is a comedy, and making a comedy choose between its message and its jokes is like asking someone to choose between their job and their personality. But the choice matters. It shows you exactly how far the show is willing to go before it pulls back. Peter drives home drunk from the meeting. He falls asleep at the wheel. He crashes into a tree. He dies on impact. Death arrives. Death, in the world of Family Guy, is a recurring character, a friendly, slightly tired figure who appears when the show needs to handle mortality without actually committing to it. He gives Peter a second chance, which is how the show signals that what comes next matters without actually allowing the consequences to be permanent. Death shows Peter two visions. The first vision is Peter continuing to drink the way he has been drinking. This version of Peter is not just a heavier drinker, he is an abusive man. He tortures his family. He gives them cigar burns. The episode uses this specific detail, not something vague and deniable, but a specific act of physical cruelty. He has a sexual relationship with his boss, Angela, which the show makes clear Peter finds revolting, even in the vision. He is filthy. His house is falling apart around him. His family is afraid of him. There is no comedy in this sequence. The show plays it straight, and the straightness is jarring enough that it works. You believe, inside the world of the episode, that this is a real possible future for this particular man. Stewie, in the vision, enjoys the cigar burns. This one detail is a small Stewie joke dropped inside a dark sequence, and it is the show hedging slightly, just enough to remind you that you are still watching Family Guy, but it does not break the scene. The vision is dark, and the show means it to be dark. Peter says he wishes he had never touched alcohol at all. Death shows him that version too. Sober Peter has a different voice. It is lighter, more careful, the voice of a man who has never needed volume or looseness to get through a social situation. He drinks milk. He has different friends. He is at the Drunken Clam, the same bar, but the people he is with are quiet and careful and proud of themselves for being there without drinking. Joe and Quagmire are still present in Quahog, still loud and messy, but sober Peter looks at them the way a person looks at strangers making too much noise at a restaurant, with mild disapproval and no interest in getting closer. He does not know them. Not really. The friendship that exists in real life, the years of shared evenings and stupid adventures and genuine loyalty, does not exist in this version because it was built inside a shared relationship with alcohol. Take the alcohol out of the origin story, and the friendships do not form. Peter hates this version of himself even more than the abusive drunk version. Death's conclusion is that Peter does not need to give up drinking entirely. He needs to drink in moderation. He has the willpower to put the bottle down sometimes. This is the episode's moral position, stated plainly by a supernatural character in the last few minutes. Not sobriety, not continuation, but moderation. A middle path. The episode presents this as wisdom. Then the show undercuts it. Peter is resurrected. He agrees to try moderation. From that point on, every time he buys a six-pack, he throws 3 cans in the trash. Lois is delighted. This is the resolution the episode offers. Peter cutting his beer consumption in half, literally, by discarding it before he can drink it. The final scene is at a landfill. The seagulls have been drinking the discarded beer. They are stumbling around, drunk. One of them mentions that the food in buckets labeled KFC is incredible. Another seagull informs him that he is eating another bird. The first seagull has a total breakdown. It is a good joke. It is the kind of joke Family Guy does better than almost any other other show. Absurd, unexpected, with a dark edge that arrives too fast to be stopped. And it is also the show doing exactly what it always does, taking the weight out of a moment that was starting to feel heavy, replacing it with something lighter, and sending the audience home in a better mood than the material probably earned. The episode's moral, drink in moderation, is genuinely delivered. Death was not joking. Peter was not performing his agreement. For approximately 30 seconds of television, Family Guy said something true about what heavy drinking costs a person, and offered a real, practical response that did not require the character to become someone else entirely. And then, the seagulls got drunk, and everyone laughed, and the episode ended. What makes Friends of Peter G important is not that it solved anything. It did not. Peter's drinking in subsequent seasons does not reflect a man who has absorbed the lesson death taught him. The moderation resolution lasted exactly as long as the episode did. But the episode matters because of what it was willing to show in that middle section. The abusive drunk vision, the specific detail of the cigar burns, the cold portrait of a man who has let one thing consume everything else he was. The show looked directly at the worst version of Peter's drinking and did not look away, which is more than it usually does. It also matters because of Brian. Brian goes through this entire episode, the AA meetings, the encouragement of relapse, the cover story, the death, the resurrection, and comes out the other side having learned nothing that the episode acknowledges. His resistance to AA is presented as his consistent position. His argument that people will just become addicted to AA instead is never refuted in any meaningful way. He is, at the end of the episode, the same Brian who walked in at the beginning. A drinker who has decided that his drinking is a personal matter and that anyone who suggests otherwise is overreacting. The show gives Peter a supernatural intervention and a moral conclusion. Brian gets nothing. This choice is not accidental. Brian's drinking is coded as different from Peter's, more sophisticated, more controlled, more a matter of taste than need. The show does not send Brian to meet death because the show does not believe, at this point in its run, that Brian has a drinking problem in the same way Peter does. This belief is going to become harder to sustain as the series continues. But in season 9, the show still draws a clear line between Peter's beer and Brian's wine, and it puts all the moral weight on Peter's side of that line. __, quote _6 __. The distinction matters. And it matters even more when you see what Brian does in season 14, when he gets his hands on something that is not alcohol at all, a child's prescription medication, and uses it to chase the one thing he has wanted his entire life, proof that he is as talented as he has always believed himself to be. Section 5, 420, Brian's marijuana arrest and the broken ASOP, S7E12. Brian Griffin has a type when it comes to substances. It is not a type defined by what the substance does to his body. It is a type defined by what the substance does to his story about himself. The cocaine in season 3 made him feel purposeful. The wine he carries through every season makes him feel refined. The Adderall he takes in season 14 makes him feel productive. Every substance Brian has ever used has been recruited into the same ongoing project, which is the construction and maintenance of a version of Brian Griffin that is smarter, more capable, and more worthy of recognition than the one that actually exists on a day-to-day basis. Marijuana is different, or at least Brian thinks it is different. He does not use marijuana to feel better about himself. He uses it the way some people use a long drive or a walk with no destination, as a way to turn the noise down. The ambition, the self-criticism, the constant awareness of the gap between where he is and where he thinks he should be. Marijuana, for Brian, is the one substance that does not ask anything of him. It does not make him feel like a genius. It just makes him feel like the pressure is off for a while. The show understands this distinction. It also uses it to set up one of the most complicated addiction episodes in its run. An episode that starts as a legal story, becomes a political story, and ends as a character study about a man who will compromise any principle he holds if the right thing is offered in exchange. Season 7, Episode 12, titled 420, aired on April 19th, 2009, one day before April 20th, which is the date associated with cannabis use in American culture. Written by Patrick Meighan, who was writing his second episode of the season following Road to Germany. Directed by Julius Wu. The episode drew 7.40 million viewers on its original airing, which made it one of the stronger episodes of season 7 in terms of audience numbers. The episode begins with a separate story that sets Brian's arrest in motion through a chain of events involving Peter and Quagmire. Quagmire has adopted a stray cat named James, and his attachment to the cat has changed him. He is calmer, more focused on home life, less available for the kind of evenings at the Drunken Clam that Peter values. Peter finds this irritating. While Quagmire is out buying James a birthday present, the group decides to shave the cat as a prank. The prank goes wrong. Peter kills the cat with the razor. Peter and Brian take the body to the woods to dispose of it and tell Quagmire the cat ran away. They are pulled over by police on the way. The officers find the dead cat, note it calmly, and move on. Then they find marijuana in the car and arrest Brian immediately. The joke is in the contrast. A dead animal barely registers, but marijuana results in instant handcuffs. And the joke is making a real point about how drug laws are enforced and what they prioritize, which is the kind of thing Family Guy does when it is working at its best, hiding a legitimate argument inside a laugh. Brian is bailed out by the family. He is put on probation. Joe arrives at the house shortly afterward to conduct a drug test, which is part of Brian's probation conditions. Brian has been smoking marijuana since getting home. He asks Stewie to provide a urine sample so he can pass the test without stopping. Lois catches him in the middle of this. She tells him that if he is willing to go to these lengths just to keep smoking, then something needs to change. Brian's response is not to quit. His response is to launch a campaign to make marijuana legal. This is the move the episode is built around, and it is a very Brian move. Faced with a rule he does not agree with, Brian does not quietly work around it or accept it as the cost of his choices. He decides the rule is wrong, and that his personal situation is actually a political issue. There is genuine logic to this. Many of Brian's arguments for legalization in the episode are accurate and coherent, but there is also a significant amount of Brian using political conviction as a shield for personal convenience, and the show does not fully let him off the hook for that. Brian and Stewie collaborate on a public musical number called A Bag of Weed. The song is performed to the tune of Me Ol' Bamboo from the 1964 film Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. It is enthusiastic, choreographed, and unambiguously in favor of marijuana. During the number, a picture of actor Woody Harrelson appears, a reference to his well-known support of marijuana legalization. The cartoon character Shaggy from Scooby-Doo appears in the crowd, a nod to the long-running joke about his stoned behavior on that show. The song works. The entire town rallies behind Brian and Stewie. Mayor Adam West legalizes marijuana in Quahog. Almost everyone starts smoking it. Brian reports the results. Crime is down, productivity is up, and Doctor Who ratings have gone through the roof. Even Peter cannot set up one of his trademark cutaway gags because he is too stoned to think of one. This is the moment where the episode runs into a problem it created for itself. The DVD commentary for the episode confirms that the censors at the network did not want marijuana to be presented purely in a positive light, which is why the legalization scenes also include depictions of people becoming unable to function properly. Tom Tucker and Diane Simmons, the local news anchors, can barely form sentences while reporting on air. People are visibly impaired in ways that contradict the productive, thriving Quahog that Brian is describing out loud. So the episode is simultaneously arguing two things at once. Brian says the town has improved. The animation shows people who cannot do their jobs. The words say one thing, the pictures say another. This contradiction was built into the episode by outside pressure from the network, which means the show was not fully free to say what it wanted to say. But the result is an episode that functions as both a pro-legalization argument and an anti-legalization argument at the same time, depending on which layer you are paying attention to. Then, Carter Pewterschmidt gets involved. Carter is Lois's father, an enormously wealthy man who has never been particularly interested in the well-being of anyone other than himself. He is losing money. Now that marijuana is legal and hemp can be used to make paper and other products, his timber business is suffering. Hemp is cheaper and easier to produce than wood-based paper, and the legal marijuana market has opened the door to hemp production on a scale that cuts directly into his profits. Carter goes to Peter. He offers him money to make anti-marijuana videos that will turn public opinion back against legalization. Peter agrees, because Peter almost always agrees to things when money is involved. The anti-marijuana campaign begins, but Lois points out that the videos are not working, and she identifies exactly why. Brian only succeeded with his campaign because he genuinely believed what he was saying. The passion was real. Peter's paid advocacy has no passion behind it, which makes it unconvincing. Carter takes this information and uses it. He goes to Brian directly. His offer is specific. He will publish Brian's novel, the book Brian has been trying to get released for years, the one that represents his entire sense of himself as a legitimate writer rather than a failed one. And he will put an Oprah's Book Club sticker on it, which would guarantee enormous sales and serious literary attention. All Brian has to do is use his credibility and his communication skills to argue against marijuana legalization, to take the cause he just fought for and publicly reverse it. Brian takes the deal. He performs a new musical number arguing against marijuana, with the same energy and apparent conviction he brought to A Bag of Weed. The town flips. Marijuana is made illegal again. Brian's novel, Faster Than the Speed of Love, is published with 2 million copies printed. printed with the Oprah sticker on the cover. Not a single copy sells. Every critic in the country pans it. The reviews are devastating. Tom Tucker reports that Brian's book has set a record as the worst-selling novel ever published. Not one copy out of 2 million printed found a buyer. Stewie builds a fort in the living room out of the unsold books and calls it a house made of mediocrity. As a direct result of Brian's reversal, marijuana is illegal again. Brian gave up a political position he genuinely held, a legal change that had genuinely improved the town by his own account, for a book deal that produced nothing. He sold his principles for a sticker on a book that no one wanted. The episode does not editorialize about this. It does not have another character tell Brian what he did was wrong, or have Brian deliver a speech about what he learned. It just shows you the outcome, the fort made of unsold books, the record-breaking failure, and lets that sit. Because the episode is not really about marijuana. It is about the specific way Brian Griffin is addicted to the idea of being recognized as talented. The marijuana is the surface. Underneath the marijuana is the novel. Underneath the novel is Brian's need for someone with authority and credibility to tell him that he is worth taking seriously. Carter offered him that, wrapped in an Oprah sticker, and Brian took it immediately, without apparent hesitation, even though it meant reversing everything he had just publicly fought for. This is a more uncomfortable kind of addiction than cocaine or alcohol or prescription pills, because it does not look like addiction from the outside. Brian did not lose control. He made a rational calculation. He weighed what he wanted against what was being offered, and chose what he wanted. The problem is, what he wanted, external confirmation of his own talent, and how completely it overrode everything else he claimed to value. High Times magazine named Brian Griffin its Stoner of the Year for 2009, as a direct result of this episode. He was the first animated character to receive the award. The Venezuelan government reacted to the episode by banning Family Guy from local networks. Justice Minister Tarek El Aissami stated that the show promoted cannabis use and threatened financial penalties for any cable station that continued to air it. The local station Venevisión avoided the penalties by replacing the scheduled Family Guy episode with a Baywatch rerun and airing public service films as an apology. The Parents Television Council, which had been criticizing Family Guy since its premiere and had named it their worst TV show of the week on more than 40 separate occasions, targeted a rerun of 420 on June 6, 2009, calling it the worst program of that week, specifically because of its focus on marijuana legalization. All of this happened around an episode that ended with its protagonist selling out his beliefs for nothing and a cartoon baby building a fort out of the wreckage of a failed literary career. The external reactions, the award from a marijuana magazine, the ban from a foreign government, the condemnation from a conservative watchdog group, all treated 420 as though it had a clear position. The award givers thought it was pro-marijuana, the foreign government thought it was pro-marijuana, the Parents Television Council thought it was pro-marijuana. None of them were entirely wrong, but none of them were looking at the part of the episode that matters most, which is what happens after the song ends and the deal is made and the books sit unsold in Stewie's fort. The episode's real argument is not about marijuana at all. It is about what Brian is willing to do when the right thing is dangled in front of him, and how quickly the answer turns out to be almost anything. __quote _8 ___. That pattern, the willingness to compromise when recognition is on the table, is going to appear again in season 14, in a different form, with a different substance, producing a different kind of creative frenzy. Brian is going to find something that does not just make him feel like a writer. It is going to make him feel like the writer he has always believed he is. And what George R.R. Martin says to him at the end of that experience is going to be the most precisely aimed criticism Brian Griffin has ever received. Not about the drugs, but about what the drugs revealed. Section 6, __quote _9 __. Prescription drugs, Adderall, and the creativity lie. Season 14, episode 1. Brian Griffin has wanted one thing his entire life. Not love, though he pursues that too. Not alcohol, though he reaches for that constantly. Not marijuana, though he went to war for his right to it. The one thing Brian has wanted, from the first season to the last, is for someone with real authority and real credibility to look at something he created and tell him it is good. That is the engine underneath everything else. The drinking, the failed relationships, the political opinions delivered at dinner tables where nobody asked, all of it is the behavior of a person trying to convince the world that he is worth taking seriously, because he has not yet fully convinced himself. Season 14, episode 1 of Family Guy is called Pilling Them Softly. immediately. It aired on September 27, 2015. It was written by Hayes Davenport and directed by Jerry Langford. It was the 250th episode of Family Guy overall, a number the show acknowledged as significant. The title is a reference to the 1973 Roberta Flack song, Killing Me Softly. Seth MacFarlane won the Outstanding Character Voiceover Performance Emmy for his work in this episode specifically. The episode begins with Stewie at preschool. His teacher pulls Lois aside and tells her that Stewie has been having trouble paying attention in class. She says he has been difficult to manage and that the teacher's manual recommends medication for any student who is difficult to manage. The ease and speed of this recommendation is part of the episode's point. There is no extended evaluation, no second opinion sought, no real pause to consider whether a child who is already speaking in full sentences and building devices in his bedroom might simply be bored. The teacher reads from a manual. Lois takes Stewie to Dr. Hartman. Dr. Hartman reads the prescription information off his phone. Stewie leaves the office with ADHD medication. He comes home and takes the pill. Brian goes to check on him and finds Stewie lying on a mountain of pillows and stuffed animals, completely still, eyes open and glassy, moving at approximately 1/10 of his normal speed. Stewie calls it his pillow world. He is not distressed. He is not in pain. He is just gone. The sharp, fast, dangerous version of Stewie that the show has built across 14 seasons has been chemically replaced by something that will take a nap without complaint and cause no problems in a classroom. Brian is immediately and vocally against this. He objects to Stewie being medicated. He argues that Stewie is too young for prescription pills, that the solution to a child not paying attention should not be a chemical one, that something is wrong with a system that moves this fast from complaint to prescription. His position is reasonable, and he holds it with real conviction. Then Meg mentions, casually, that the medication makes you more productive. Brian stops talking. Something shifts behind his eyes. He goes quiet in a way that is different from his usual quiet, which tends to be the quiet of someone composing their next argument. This is the quiet of someone doing math. He takes one of Stewie's pills. The change is immediate and total. Brian goes from his usual pace, thoughtful, deliberate, slightly self-satisfied, to something that looks like a completely different character. His eyes go red. His speech accelerates. He cannot stop moving. He starts a project, and then expands the project, and then expands it again, each addition leading naturally to 3 more, until the project has consumed the entire basement of the Griffin house. What he builds down there is called Spaceshire 7. It is a complete science fantasy universe, its own rules, its own history, its own characters, its own languages. He writes a 2,000-page treatment for it. He constructs a full physical model of the world in the basement, a detailed landscape with buildings and figures and geography laid out across the floor. He pitches it to anyone who will listen, his sentences running into each other, his hands moving constantly, every idea generating 3 more before the first one is finished. From the outside, it looks like creativity. From inside Brian's head, it feels like creativity. The medication has removed whatever internal resistance usually sits between his ideas and his output. He is producing at a rate he has never produced before. The novel he could not finish, the screenplay that went nowhere, the years of sitting with a half-empty page, all of that feels, on the Adderall, like it belongs to a different person. This version of Brian does not get stuck. This version of Brian finishes things. He decides to take Spaceshire 7 directly to the person most qualified to evaluate it. George R.R. Martin is at a book convention in Hartford, Connecticut. He is one of the most successful fantasy writers alive, best known for the book series that became the television show Game of Thrones. Brian and Stewie travel to Hartford. Brian gets in front of Martin, pitches the concept, and delivers what he clearly believes is a compelling, detailed, original creative vision. Martin listens. Then he responds. He tells Brian that he knows Brian was on drugs when he wrote it. He says the drugs did not make Brian write well. They made Brian write a lot. These are 2 different things, and Martin is not gentle about the distinction. That line, the drugs didn't make you write well, they just made you write a lot, is the center of the entire episode. Everything else, the preschool meeting, Stewie's pillow world, the basement construction project, the trip to Hartford, is built around delivering that one sentence to Brian Griffin at the exact moment when he is least prepared to receive it. Because Brian thought it was the same thing. He thought that the sensation of writing without resistance, of producing page after page without getting stuck, meant that what he was producing was good. The medication gave him a feeling he had never had before. The feeling of being a working, functioning, completing writer. And he confused that feeling with the actual achievement of writing something worth reading. The feeling was real. The quality was not there. This is what makes the episode such a specific and honest addiction story. It is not about a substance that makes you feel good. It is not about a high in any traditional sense. It is about a substance that makes you feel capable. And the terrible thing that happens happens when you discover that feeling capable and actually being capable are not the same. Brian has spent his entire life believing his problem is output. If he could just produce more, finish more, get more words on the page, the quality would follow. The Adderall seemed to solve the output problem completely. 2,000 pages in the time it would normally take him to finish a chapter. A full constructed world in a basement. The feeling of a dam breaking and everything that had been held back finally flowing through. And George R.R. Martin, who has read enough writing to know the difference between volume and quality from the first paragraph, looked at what Brian produced and saw exactly what it was. A lot of words, no good ones. Brian and Stewie leave the convention and agree that they no longer need the pills. They go home. The Spaceshire 7 model stays in the basement, presumably, until the show's next episode forgets it existed. The Adderall storyline ends cleanly, as these things do in Family Guy, without the kind of extended withdrawal or rebuilding period that would follow in a more realistic story. But the Martin conversation does not go away as easily as the pills do. What Martin said to Brian in Hartford is the harshest possible version of something Brian already knows and refuses to fully face. Brian is not a bad writer because he lacks effort or time or access to tools. He is a bad writer, or at least a writer who has not yet produced anything good, because the ideas he believes are original are not as original as he believes. And the voice he thinks is distinctive is not as distinctive as he needs it to be, and no substance on earth can manufacture those things from scratch. The cocaine in season 3 filled an empty space and gave him momentum. The marijuana gives him rest from his own ambition. The Adderall gave him the sensation of genius. Every substance Brian uses is a different attempt to feel like the writer he tells himself he is. None of them produce the writing. They produce the feeling of writing, which is close enough to fool him for as long as the substance is active. When the pill wears off and the pages are there but they are not good, that is the real withdrawal. Not the physical one. The one where you sit with the stack of paper you produced and realize that you cannot blame the resistance for the quality, because the resistance is gone and the quality is still missing. Brian walks away from Hartford carrying that. The show moves on. Next week is a different episode, but the George R.R. Martin conversation is the most honest assessment of Brian Griffin that any character in the series has ever delivered. And the fact that it came inside an addiction episode rather than a character study episode is not a coincidence. The writers knew what they were doing. They built the Adderall story specifically so that the truth could be delivered by someone Brian could not dismiss, at a moment when Brian had eliminated every excuse. The drugs revealed what was already true. They just made it impossible to look away from. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And if Brian's story in season 14 is about what happens when a substance exposes the gap between who you believe you are and what you have actually built, then the next story in this series belongs to a character who has no gap of that kind. Someone who has genuinely built something, who holds the family together, who functions and manages and keeps everything running. And what happens to that character when a bottle of painkillers lands in her life is not funny at all. Section 7. Lois and the Prescription Painkiller Crisis. Quote 11. S20E16. Lois Griffin runs the house on Spooner Street. This is not a small thing. The house contains Peter, who causes damage at a rate that would exhaust most people inside a week. It contains Stewie, who is planning things that would frighten a military general. It contains Chris, who needs more patience than he usually receives. It contains Meg, who needs more of everything than she usually receives. It contains Brian, who drinks too much and finishes too little and takes up emotional space with his problems the way a large piece of furniture takes up physical space in a small room. And it contains Lois herself, who manages all of this every day with a level of consistency that the show acknowledges mostly by showing you what happens when it is briefly removed. Lois is not a saint. The show has never tried to make her one. She has her own selfishness, her own blind spots, her own moments where she fails the people she loves in ways the episode calls out directly. But she is, structurally, the person the Griffin household depends on to remain upright. When she is functioning, the house functions. When she stops functioning, everything else stops too. Season 20, episode 16 of Family Guy is called Prescription Heroin. It aired on March 27th, 2022. The production code is LACX-13. The title is a deliberate double meaning. Heroin, as in a female hero, and heroin, as in the drug. And the episode uses both meanings intentionally. The story it tells is about a woman who holds everything together, losing her grip on herself. And it does so with more directness and less comedy padding than almost any other addiction episode the show has produced. The setup is simple. Brian breaks his arm. The veterinarian gives him prescription painkillers to manage the pain. Lois gets into the pills. The show does not spend a lot of time explaining how this happens, because it does not need to. The opioid crisis overdose in America had been a documented public health emergency for years by the time this episode aired, and one of the most well-established facts about that crisis is how ordinary the beginning of it looks. A prescription exists. The pills are in the house. Someone in pain, not necessarily physical pain, but the accumulated weight of a life that asks a great deal of them every single day, finds the pills and discovers that they make the weight feel lighter for a little while. Lois's addiction escalates quickly. The episode does not show a gradual slide. It shows someone who finds something that works and immediately needs more of it, which is how opioid addiction behaves in real life. The pills were prescribed for Brian's broken arm. By the time the episode reaches its middle section, Lois is doing things she would never do sober. Things that the show plays for the dark comedy they are, but that carry a genuine chill underneath the laughter. The most disturbing scene in the episode involves Stewie. Lois drops a pill in the bathroom. It falls into the toilet. She cannot reach it. Her need for the pill is strong enough that she picks up Stewie, holds him upside down over the toilet bowl, and forces his head into the water to fish the pill out. She is using her infant son as a tool to retrieve a drug. Stewie, who is many things but is not physically capable of overpowering Lois, cannot stop her. Brian walks in and saves Stewie before anything worse happens. This scene is not played as a gentle joke. The image of a mother holding her baby head first into a toilet because she needs what is at the bottom of it is not something the show treats as broadly funny in the way it treats most physical comedy. It is staged to be uncomfortable. The show wants you to feel the wrongness of it, and it achieves that, which is more than it usually asks of its audience during an addiction storyline. Brian's response to discovering what Lois has become is worth examining closely. Brian, across more than 20 seasons of Family Guy, has had a well-established and frequently referenced attraction to Lois. He finds her appealing in a way the show has used as a recurring source of both jokes and occasional genuine tension. He has never acted on it in any serious way, but the attraction is consistent and documented across the show's run. When Lois is at her lowest, dependent, compromised, willing to do things she would never do in her right mind, Brian does not take advantage of the situation. He does not use her vulnerability to get closer to her, or to position himself as her rescuer in a way that serves his own interests. He helps her get sober. The episode specifically acknowledges this as notable behavior for his character. It treats Brian's choice to do the right thing as a genuine character moment, rather than a given. His method is not gentle. Brian tricks Lois into getting inside his dog crate by telling her there is one last pill in there. She goes in. He locks the crate. He is going to keep her locked up until the addiction loosens its hold on her, a decision the show presents as tough love, hard on both of them, but the only available option given how far gone she already is. Lois, locked in the crate, turns to Stewie for help. She asks him to open the door and let her out. Stewie ignores her completely. He will not help her. The reason is not stated out loud, but it does not need to be. Stewie was the one held headfirst into a toilet. Whatever sympathy he might have extended has already been used up. The reversal is pointed. The show has a long history of Stewie desperately trying to get Lois's attention and being ignored. The famous sequence of mom, mom, mommy escalating until he gives up. Now Lois is the one calling for help and being met with silence. The show does not underline this connection loudly. It trusts the audience to recognize the role reversal on its own. For viewers who have watched enough Family Guy to remember the original scene, the parallel lands hard. For viewers who have not, the scene still works as a portrait of a woman whose actions have closed off the person she might otherwise have turned to. The title of the episode carries the full weight of what the show is gesturing at. Prescription heroin. The heroine meaning of the word describes Lois in her normal state. The person who holds things together, who does the work nobody else will do, who keeps the household functional through sheer consistency. The heroine meaning of the word describes what the prescription became for her. The episode is asking you to hold both meanings at once. The same woman, the same body, the same person, just with the pills in the picture. This is the show engaging, however briefly, with something that was happening to real families across America at the time of airing and for the decade before it. The opioid crisis claimed hundreds of thousands of lives between the late 1990s and the early 2020s. A significant portion of those cases followed the same basic pattern as Lois's. A prescription entered a household for a legitimate reason, and someone who was not the intended patient found it, and the gap between prescribed painkiller and crisis was shorter than anyone around them expected. Family Guy is not a documentary. It is not trying to be one. But the episode's refusal to play Lois's addiction purely for laughs, the toilet scene, the crate, Stewie's cold silence, suggest that the writers were aware they were touching something real and chose not to completely bury it under jokes. The episode ends with Lois getting through the withdrawal period inside Brian's crate and returning to something like herself. The resolution is reasonably clean, ending, as Family Guy resolutions tend to be. But the final beat of the episode does something unusual. The implication is left hanging that Lois is already looking for other ways to feel the way the pills made her feel. The addiction is not described as over. The specific substance is gone. The need it was filling is not. This ending is more honest than most addiction conclusions Family Guy has offered. Brian's cocaine story ended with him leaving for the airport. Peter's drinking story ended with seagulls getting drunk on discarded beer cans. Those endings cushion the moment with humor or movement. Prescription heroin ends with a quiet suggestion that Lois is not finished, that the thing the pills addressed has not gone away, that what the audience is seeing is a pause rather than a resolution. The show choosing to leave that ambiguity in place, rather than giving Lois a clean recovery moment and moving on, is a small but meaningful decision. It acknowledges that the kind of addiction Lois developed does not end neatly. The pills were filling something. Whatever that something is, it is still there. Lois's addiction story sits differently from Brian's or Peter's because of what she represents in the show's structure. Peter's drinking is his identity. Brian's substance use is his ongoing attempt to close the gap between his self-image and his reality. But Lois's opioid use is about exhaustion. She is the person everyone else leans on, and the pills were the first thing she found that let her put the weight down for a little while. That is not a character flaw. That is what happens to people who carry too much for too long without anyone noticing. The show noticed. For one episode, it put that on screen without flinching too much. And then, as it always does, it moved forward. __quote _12 ___. What comes next is a story about a completely different kind of addiction beginning. Not one born from pain or ambition or exhaustion, but one that started because a father wanted to watch television in peace and sent his daughter to a party to get her out of the way. And what happened to that daughter, and what her father said to her when they both woke up hungover and stranded at sea, turned out to be the most quietly moving conversation about drinking that Peter Griffin ever had with anyone. Section 8. Meg gets drunk and Peter gives actual advice. Quote 13, 16, E8. Meg Griffin does not get a lot of wins. This is not an accident or an oversight on the part of the writers. It is a deliberate and long-running feature of how Family Guy uses Meg. She is the family member everyone overlooks, the one who gets the least and asks for the most and receives the worst version of whatever the episode is offering that week. She has been used as a punchline, a punching bag, and occasionally a prop. The show has built her unpopularity into her DNA so completely that by season 16, it is less a character trait and more a law of the universe she inhabits. Meg Griffin does not get breaks, does not get credit, and does not get to be cool. Which is exactly why the opening of Crimes and Meg's demeanor works the way it does. Season 16, Episode 8, aired December 3rd, 2017. Written by Mike Desilets, directed by Greg Colton. The total episode count at this point in the series is 297. The production code is FACX-05. The episode title is a reference to the Woody Allen film Crimes and Misdemeanors. Peter wants to watch television. Lois is home. The kids are home. The living room is occupied and contested. Peter, operating with his characteristic approach to parenting, which is to find the path that solves his immediate problem with the least possible involvement on his part, tells Meg to go out and have fun. He wants her gone so he can have the couch. This is the entire reason Meg ends up at the party. Not because she was invited, not because she sought it out, because her father wanted to watch TV. She goes. She tries to talk to people. The conversations do not go well, which is consistent with Meg's experience of social situations generally. She is standing at the edge of things, which is where she usually stands, when she notices the bar setup at the party and starts drinking. Something unexpected happens. She gets funny. Not funny in a desperate, trying too hard way. Actually funny. She starts making jokes, including a crack about a group of slightly overweight students who formed an a cappella group, suggesting they call themselves the Trans Fats. The joke lands. People laugh. Meg, who spends most of her life invisible or mocked, suddenly has a room's attention in a way that feels genuinely good rather than humiliating. The show is making a specific and honest observation here. For a person who has never had easy access to social confidence, alcohol does not just lower their guard. It temporarily removes the weight of every bad social experience they have accumulated. Meg is not drunk in the sloppy, falling over way the show usually presents intoxication. She is loosened. She is present in a way she rarely gets to be. The drinking gave her access to a version of herself that could hold a room. And of course she wants to go back to that version. Of course she does. She brings the drinking home. Lois notices immediately. She finds a Taco Bell bag in Meg's room, which confirms her suspicion that Meg has been out drinking. The connection being that late night Taco Bell, and alcohol tend to travel together. Lois confronts Peter about it, pointing out that he sent Meg to the party in the first place. She tells him he needs to fix it. Lois also says something that stops the scene cold for a moment. She tells Meg, when she first catches her, that alcoholism runs in the family. 5 words. The show does not expand on them. No character asks which family members or how far back it goes or what that means for any of them. Lois says it and the scene moves forward and nobody brings it up again. But those 5 words are doing something important. They are the show, in season 16, acknowledging in plain language what it has been depicting since season 1. The Griffin family has a documented, multi-generational pattern of substance use. Peter drinks at a level that has killed him, caused car accidents, flooded public buildings, and prompted a visit from Death himself. His biological father, Mickey McFinnigan, is an Irish alcoholic. The household dog is an alcoholic who is also a recovering cocaine user. And now Lois is telling her daughter that this pattern has a name and a history, and that Meg needs to understand what she is walking toward. Peter's attempt to talk to Meg about drinking leads them, with no apparent awareness of the irony, directly to the drunken Clam. Peter sits his daughter down at a bar to explain why she should be careful about drinking. They have the conversation. Then they start drinking together. Then they drink more. Then, at some point during the night, in a state of complete blackout, they board a boat docked nearby, cast off from the dock, and sail away from Quahog into open water. They wake up the next morning, adrift at sea. Both of them are experiencing their first hours of what a serious night of drinking costs you the next day. The headache that feels structural, the nausea, the specific shame of not being able to fully account for how you arrived at your current location. Peter, who has been through this many times, is more or less functional inside it. Meg, for whom this is a new experience, is in genuine physical distress. Peter uses the last remaining battery on his phone not to call for help, but to open an app that makes it look like he and Meg have swapped faces. He shows her the result. It is funny to him. Meg, adrift at sea and feeling terrible, is less entertained. Eventually they are rescued. They are taken to the hospital. Meg is alive and physically fine, and has learned something about what a night of serious drinking produces as a consequence. The episode could end here, with a recovery, a resolution, a return to normal Meg status. But before they get off the boat, something happens that makes this episode genuinely different from everything around it. Peter talks to Meg honestly. Not in a speech, not in the kind of neatly packaged lesson that an after-school special would deliver. He talks to her the way a person talks when they are hungover and uncomfortable and too tired to manage their words carefully. He tells her he does not want her drinking because he does not want her wasting the good parts of her life being too drunk or too sick to use them. He tells her she has a good head on her shoulders. He tells her that he pushed her toward the party because he wanted the couch to himself, and he admits this without being asked to. Then he tells her something that is the closest Peter Griffin has ever come to understanding his own relationship with alcohol. He tells her she does not need it. That the version of herself she found at the party, the one who could hold a room, who could make people laugh, who could be present and confident and noticed, is already in there without the drinking. The alcohol did not create that Meg. It just let her find her for an evening. Peter knows this because he knows the opposite is true for him. The version of Peter that exists without alcohol, the one Death showed him in season 9, the milk-drinking stranger at the bar who does not know his own friends, is genuinely lesser. Peter needs what the drinking gives him in a way that Meg, at 17, at the very beginning of her relationship with alcohol, does not yet need it. He can see the difference between his situation and hers. He cannot fix his own situation, but he can, in this moment, make sure she does not arrive at the same place he did. Meg does not hold the party against him. She accepts what he says. She agrees to stop. The episode wraps up and the normal order of things is restored. Meg goes back to being overlooked, the drinking storyline does not extend beyond the episode, and Family Guy continues on its way. But the conversation on the boat is one of the most genuinely affecting things the show has ever produced in the context of its addiction storylines. And the reason it works is that it is not built from dramatic music or a long, tearful speech or any of the tools a more serious drama would use. It is built from Peter Griffin, hungover, adrift at sea, too tired to perform anything, saying true things to his daughter in plain language. The honesty of the moment is possible because of the context. Peter is not trying to parent Meg. He gave up trying to parent Meg years ago. He is just talking to her the way one person talks to another when the situation has stripped away everything else and left only the actual conversation. And what comes out of that, accidentally, is something true. Peter sees Meg clearly in that moment, in a way he rarely does. He sees that she is capable, that the confidence she found at the party is real and belongs to her. And he sees that she is at a fork in the road where the direction she chooses now will have consequences he recognizes because he is living them. He cannot go back and take the other fork fork himself, but he can point at it for her. Lois said alcoholism runs in the family. Peter, without using that language, showed Meg exactly what it looks like to be standing at the place where the running starts. And then he told her, as clearly as he knew how, that she did not have to run. It is the most responsible thing Peter Griffin does in 16 seasons of television. It happened on a boat, at sea, while he was hungover, and it lasted about 2 minutes, and the show moved on the next week as if it had not happened, but it happened.
And in a show that spends most of its time treating addiction as a backdrop or a punchline or a story that resolves cleanly before the credits roll, 2 minutes of Peter Griffin being honest with his daughter about what alcohol actually does carries more weight than almost anything else in the series. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What the show has not yet done, across all of these stories, is name the structure underneath all of them. There is a pattern running through every addiction episode Family Guy has ever told, a consistent set of beliefs the show holds about what substances are and what they do and who they do it to. The next section is about that pattern, and specifically about the character who embodies it most completely, who has been carrying it across more than 20 seasons, and whose relationship with alcohol the show has treated so differently from Peter's that the difference itself becomes the argument. Section 9. The cutaway as addiction delivery system. How Family Guy normalizes substance use through structure. There is a technique Family Guy uses more than any other show on television. It is the cutaway gag. A character says something, or a situation calls for a reference, and the show cuts away from the main story to show a completely separate scene, sometimes 3 seconds long, sometimes 30, before cutting back to wherever the story was. The cutaway is Family Guy's signature. It is the thing critics point to when they criticize the show, and the thing fans point to when they defend it. It is the engine the show runs on. It is also the specific mechanism through which Family Guy has spent more than 20 years treating addiction as entertainment without ever fully treating it as a consequence. To understand how this works, you have to understand what a cutaway actually does to the story around it. When Family Guy cuts away from a scene, the scene stops. Whatever emotional weight was building in the room, whatever a character was feeling, whatever the situation was asking the audience to sit with, gets interrupted. The cutaway does not resolve the weight. It replaces it temporarily with something else, usually something funny. And when the story returns, the weight has been quietly reduced. The audience has laughed. The moment has passed. The story continues from a slightly lighter place than it left. Apply this to addiction, and the effect becomes very specific. Every time the show cuts away from a moment of genuine consequence, Peter causing damage while drunk, Brian reaching for a drink at a moment of emotional pain, any character using any substance at a moment that should carry real weight, the cutaway absorbs the consequence before the audience can fully feel it. The moment happened. The laugh happened. The story moved on. The consequence never fully landed because it was never allowed enough time on screen to land. The Mr. Booze sequence in Friends of Peter G is the clearest example of this in the entire series. Peter and Brian have just talked a room full of recovering alcoholics back into drinking. These are people who came to an AA meeting specifically because alcohol has damaged their lives in serious ways. Peter and Brian, sentenced to attend those meetings as a legal consequence of their own drinking, have responded by undermining the one support system those people had. This is not a minor thing. It is genuinely harmful behavior. Then the show performs Mr. Booze. The song, originally written by Sammy Cahn and Jimmy Van Heusen for the 1964 Rat Pack film Robin and the Seven Hoods, is an anti-alcohol number. Its lyrics describe the damage drinking causes. Taken at face value, it is exactly the message the episode is supposed to be delivering, but it is performed inside a scene where the very people singing it have just been convinced to start drinking again, which means the anti-alcohol message is being delivered by a group of relapsing alcoholics as a cover story to fool Joe Swanson into leaving. The irony is intentional. The performance is spectacular. The audience laughs, and in laughing, they let go of the thing the scene should have made them feel, that Peter and Brian just caused real harm to real people, because the music and the staging were too good to stay serious through. This is the cutaway mechanism applied to a musical number. The form is different, but the function is identical. Something that should carry weight is surrounded by something entertaining, and the entertainment wins. The A Bag of Weed number in the 420 episode does this in the opposite direction. Brian's argument for marijuana legalization is delivered through a song performed to the tune of Me Ol' Bamboo from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. The number is enthusiastic, well choreographed, and genuinely fun to watch. It argues for legalization emotion by making the argument feel like a celebration. The political content is real. Brian makes accurate historical points about how marijuana was criminalized in America, but it is delivered inside a format that makes it impossible to evaluate seriously, because the format is designed to make you feel good rather than think carefully. The Parents Television Council, which named Family Guy their worst TV show of the week on more than 40 separate occasions across the show's run, targeted a bag of weed specifically in their condemnation of the 420 episode when it was rerun on June 6, 2009. Their objection was that the show was promoting drug use. They were not wrong that the number felt like a promotion.
They were missing why it felt that way, which is that the show used its most entertaining available format to deliver the argument. And entertainment is better at making you feel something is right than at helping you think about whether it is. The 420 episode also contains a moment that is so perfectly self-aware, it almost undoes the whole argument. Peter, stoned, attempts to set up one of his trademark cutaway gags and cannot do it. He is too wasted to think of one. The show makes a joke out of the one situation in which its own structure breaks down, when the person responsible for triggering it is too impaired to function. The cutaway mechanism, which normally absorbs consequence and replaces it with entertainment, cannot operate when the character meant to use it is incapacitated by the very substance the episode is discussing. The show noticed this and made it a joke, which means it understood exactly what it was doing. The deeper structural problem runs across every addiction episode the show has ever made. Family Guy operates in a format where almost nothing that happens in one episode carries forward to the next unless the show explicitly chooses to acknowledge it. This is not unique to Family Guy. It is how most animated comedies of this era worked, but it has a specific effect on addiction stories that more serialized shows did not have to deal with. Peter moderates his drinking at the end of Friends of Peter G. By the next episode, he is drinking normally. Brian goes to rehab at the end of The Thin White Line and leaves early. By the next episode, the cocaine is gone and the wine glass is back. Lois gets through opioid withdrawal in prescription heroin. The following episode does not mention it. Every resolution the show offers is a resolution that the format immediately cancels. The consequence cannot accumulate because the structure will not allow accumulation. This means that no matter how honest any individual addiction episode manages to be, and some of them are genuinely honest, the honesty cannot compound. It exists inside its episode and then stops. The audience watches Peter confront his drinking, feels the weight of it, and then watches the next episode where the weight is gone and everything is as it was. The reset is not a failure of intention. It is the format doing what the format does. The cutaway takes care of the small moments. The episodic reset takes care of the large ones. Together, they create a show that can visit addiction as a subject, treat it with occasional real seriousness, produce genuine moments of honesty, and still arrive at next week exactly where it started. The substance never changes the character permanently because the format does not allow permanent change. What the show can do, and what it has done across more than 20 seasons, is leave a record. Every addiction episode is still there. The cocaine arc, the AA episode, the Adderall story, the opioid episode, the conversation on the boat, none of them changed the show's direction. All of them said something true for the length of time the episode ran. The cutaway absorbed the consequences. The reset cleared the table, but the episodes themselves remain. And taken together, they add up to something the individual episodes do not announce out loud. __quote _15 __. What they add up to is the subject of the next section. Because underneath all of the cutaway gags and all of the resets and all of the ways the show protects itself from fully committing to what it knows, there is one character whose relationship with alcohol the show has treated with a consistency that the format almost never provides. And the way the show treats his drinking versus the way it treats Peter's drinking is one of the most revealing things Family Guy has ever done without meaning to. Section 10. Brian Griffin is an alcoholic, and the show has always known it. Peter Griffin drinks beer from a can. Brian Griffin drinks wine from a glass. That difference, the can versus the glass, the beer versus the wine, is the entire argument this section is going to make. Not because the container matters, not because one drink is chemically better than the other, but because the show treats those two images completely differently, and the way it treats them reveals something about what Family Guy actually believes about class, intelligence, and which kind of drinking gets to be called a problem. Peter's drinking is loud, it is physical, it causes damage that other people have to clean up. When Peter drinks too much, he floods libraries, crashes cars, destroys property, and ends up dead on a road while death stands over him deciding what to do next. His drinking takes up space. It makes noise. It produces consequences visible
visible enough that the show can build entire episodes around them. Brian's drinking is quiet. It is refined. It happens in the background of scenes rather than at the center of them. The wine glass is almost always present, on the counter, in his hand, being refilled, but it is presented the way a piece of furniture is presented. It belongs there. It is part of the image. Nobody builds an episode around Brian's wine glass the way they build episodes around Peter's beer, because the wine glass does not read as a problem. It reads as a personality trait. This distinction is the show's class argument, and it has been running since season 1. Brian was established from the beginning as the intellectual of the Griffin household. He reads, he writes, or tries to. He has opinions about politics and literature and film. He speaks in complete sentences, with words the other characters do not always follow. He is, within the world of the show, the character who represents a certain kind of aspiration, the idea that a person can be thoughtful and cultured and above the messiness of the lives happening around them. The wine is part of that image. It signals sophistication the way a bookshelf signals education, and because it signals sophistication, the show has treated it as sophistication rather than dependency, even as the evidence that it is dependency has accumulated across season after season. The thin white line in season 3 established the pattern. Brian's cocaine addiction was caused not by exposure to cocaine, but by emptiness, by having no real purpose and no real direction, and needing something to fill the space where those things should have been. The cocaine was a solution to a pre-existing problem. When the cocaine went away, the problem stayed. The wine went back in the glass. The show moved on. Brian Sings and Swings, from season 4, shows what Brian looks like when life hits him hard enough to knock the careful image sideways. Peter runs Brian over with his car. Brian becomes depressed. He drinks heavily. At his lowest point in the episode, he is sitting in a gutter drinking wine from the bottle. Not from a glass, from the bottle, in the street, at night, alone. This is the same substance he drinks at dinner with the family, just stripped of the glass and the table and the lighting that makes it look like a choice rather than a need. The show puts Brian in the gutter with his wine and lets you see, for a moment, what the wine looks like without the framing that usually makes it presentable. Then Frank Sinatra Jr. appears, and the episode moves toward music and friendship and a happier ending, and the gutter scene is left behind. In Friends of Peter G., Brian sits in an AA meeting and argues against the entire premise of the organization. He says people will just become addicted to AA instead of alcohol. He says people who drink are more fun. He presents these arguments with the confidence of someone who has thought the matter through, which is the specific confidence of someone who has constructed a very good defense for something they do not want to examine. The episode gives Peter a supernatural intervention and a moral conclusion. Brian gets neither. He leaves the episode exactly as he entered it, holding the same position, drinking the same amount. The show does not treat this as a problem, because Brian's drinking is not coded as a problem. Peter's is. The same volume of alcohol, consumed by two different characters in two different styles, produces two completely different responses from the show's own internal moral system. Underage Peter in season 14 makes this visible in a way the show probably did not intend to highlight. When Mayor West raises the drinking age to 50 and Peter can no longer legally buy alcohol, the group discovers that Brian qualifies under dog years. 8 years old in dog years converts to 56 in human terms. Brian becomes their supplier. He buys their beer. He enables their drinking while participating in his own. Stewie watches Brian during this period and makes an observation that the show drops into the episode without much comment. He tells Brian that Peter is only friends with him because he is useful, that the friendship is conditional on Brian providing something Peter needs. Brian confronts Peter about this. Peter assures him the friendship is real. The episode resolves with their bond confirmed, but Stewie's observation does not disappear just because the episode resolves it warmly. Brian, in this stretch of the story, is functioning as a supplier for people whose drinking he has occasionally criticized. He is buying the beer. He is present for the consumption. He is, by any reasonable measure, as embedded in the group's drinking culture as any of them. More so, because he is the one making it possible. The show does not call this enabling. It calls it friendship. Pilling them softly adds another layer. Brian's initial objection to Stewie taking ADHD medication is genuine and principled. He argues against medicating a child unnecessarily. He holds this position right up until the moment he learns the medication makes you more productive, at which point he takes it himself. His stated values and his actual behavior move in completely opposite directions the moment the substance offers him something he wants. This is not a one-time inconsistency. It is a pattern that runs across every substance Brian has used. He has principles about drugs until the drug offers him something the principles cannot. The cocaine offered him purpose. The Adderall offered him productivity. The marijuana offered him rest. The wine offers him the the image of the person he is trying to be. Every time, the substance wins over the principle, and every time, the show treats it as a character moment rather than a warning sign. The most precise description of Brian's alcoholism in the entire series is delivered not by another character and not by the show's narration, but by the structure of his own behavior across more than 20 seasons. He drinks in every emotional state. He drinks when he is happy and when he is sad, and when he is bored, and when he is excited, and when he is trying to write, and when he cannot write, and when he is celebrating, and when he is grieving. There is no emotional state in Brian's life that does not include the wine glass. That is not sophistication. That is dependency. The show knows this. It has shown you the evidence season after season. It has just chosen, consistently, to frame the evidence differently, depending on who is holding the glass. Peter's beer can is a problem.
Brian's wine glass is a personality trait. The substance is almost the same. The framing is completely different. And the framing is the argument Family Guy has been making, without announcing it, for as long as both characters have been on screen together. Quote 16__. One more question remains before this series of sections reaches its conclusion. The show built its most sustained addiction argument in Season 9 with Friends of Peter G, and delivered a moral position it seemed to genuinely mean. Then, 14 years later, it returned to the same subject and quietly dismantled everything it had built. What happened in Season 23 is not just a continuity error or a writer's room losing track of old episodes. It is the show making a choice, and that choice reveals something about what long-running animated comedies ultimately believe about the stories they tell. Section 11. Season 23 undoes quote 17. The show surrenders its own rarest moment. Family Guy has been on the air for a long time. As of March 2026, the show has aired 455 episodes across 24 seasons. It remains Fox's second longest running program, sitting behind only The Simpsons. It has survived 2 cancellations, outlasted almost every show it competed with during its original run, and continued producing episodes long after most of its cultural conversation moved on to other things. That kind of lifespan is genuinely rare. It is also, for a show that occasionally tries to say something true about the people it depicts, genuinely costly. The cost is this: the longer a show runs, the harder it becomes to hold a position. Characters have to remain usable. Stories have to remain tellable. Any moral conclusion a previous season reached is a ceiling that a future season has to either honor or quietly remove. Most of the time, long-running animated comedies remove the ceiling without announcement. They do not reverse their previous positions loudly. They simply stop honoring them, episode by episode, until the position has dissolved and the show is operating as if it was never stated. This is what happened between Season 9 and Season 23 of Family Guy, and it happened to the one addiction story the show ever told that genuinely tried to mean something. Friends of Peter G, which aired on February 13th, 2011, ended with a specific moral position delivered by Death himself. Peter does not need to stop drinking. He needs to drink in moderation. He has the willpower to put the bottle down sometimes. Death showed him both versions of the extreme, the abusive drunk and the sober stranger, and concluded that neither was the answer. The answer was the middle. Peter agreed. He went home. He started throwing away half his beer every time he bought a six-pack. Lois was happy. The show had, for the first time in its run, delivered a sustained argument about Peter's drinking that felt like it was meant to stick. It did not stick. Season 23 of Family Guy aired its 17th episode, titled Fahrenheit 451, in 2025. The episode revisits the question of Peter's drinking in a way that takes everything Friends of Peter G built and quietly sets it aside. In the episode, Peter and his friends, Joe, Quagmire, and Cleveland, give up drinking entirely. The reason is specific and documented. They blacked out badly enough during 2 consecutive nights to accidentally marry each other twice. Back-to-back blackout benders, each one severe enough to produce a legal marriage. They decide, in the aftermath of this, that alcohol has to go. Peter stops drinking. The show depicts what follows as a problem. Sober Peter, in Fahrenheit 451, is described as too cheerful, too strange, too different from the Peter his family has always known. He is irritating in his sobriety. He is not the person anyone in his household wants to live with. And the resolution of the episode moves toward Peter drinking again, with his family reportedly relieved when he does, because the drinking version of Peter is easier to be around than the sober version. Stop and hold that next to what Friends of Peter G built 14 years earlier. In Season 9, Death showed Peter that total sobriety would make him a different person, someone who did not know his friends, who drank milk, who was quieter and more careful, and completely disconnected from the life he had built. The episode acknowledged this was a real cost, and concluded that moderation, not sobriety, was the answer. It did not say sobriety
was bad. It said that for this specific man, who had built his entire social world inside a culture of drinking, removing alcohol completely would remove so much of who he was that the person left behind would not be recognizable. Fahrenheit 451 takes that nuanced position and flattens it into something much simpler. It does not argue for moderation. It does not engage with what Friends of Peter G concluded. It presents sober Peter as a problem and drinking Peter as the solution, with no middle ground and no acknowledgement that the show once built a careful argument about exactly this question and arrived at a different place. The difference between the two episodes is not just a matter of tone. It is a matter of moral seriousness. Friends of Peter G treated Peter's alcoholism as something with real stakes, a force capable of producing a future where he abuses his family, burns his relationships, and loses everything that makes his life worth living. It showed Peter that future without comedy padding, let him look at it, and asked him to choose differently. Fahrenheit 451 gives Peter's alcoholism no stakes at all. It treats sobriety as the punchline. It positions the drinking as the correct outcome, not because of anything Death showed or anything Peter learned, but because sober Peter is annoying and everyone prefers the other version. This is the show choosing convenience over continuity. Not because the writers forgot Friends of Peter G, a show that has been running for 24 seasons and has a writer's room full of people who have been with it for years, does not simply forget its own significant episodes, but because honoring the conclusion of Friends of Peter G would limit what the show can do with Peter going forward. A Peter who is genuinely trying to drink in moderation, who has internalized the lesson Death delivered, is a less available character than a Peter whose drinking has no ceiling and no consequence. The reset is a creative decision as much as a continuity failure. Screen Rant, writing about Fahrenheit 451 in July 2025, described the episode as proof that Family Guy had thoroughly abandoned any attempts to comment on real-life issues. The piece called it a betrayal of Friends of Peter G, and pointed out that where the Season 9 episode argued that even a character as absurd as Peter could learn moderation, the Season 23 episode gives his alcoholism no stakes whatsoever. The contrast between the two episodes, placed side by side, is the clearest possible illustration of what the show's format ultimately does to any moral position it takes. The format wins. It always wins. The episodic reset, the cutaway that absorbs consequence, the character who must remain available for next week's story. These structural facts of how Family Guy operates are more powerful than any individual episode's intentions. Friends of Peter G was as good as this show gets at taking a subject seriously. Fahrenheit 451 is the show demonstrating, 14 years later, that seriousness does not accumulate. It only exists in the episode where it was produced. As of March 2026, Family Guy is in its 24th season, still airing on Fox, still producing episodes at a rate that keeps Peter at the Drunken Clam and Brian with his wine glass and the Griffin household more or less as it has always been. The show is not going to run out of addiction stories. It has too many characters and too much history and too many substances still available to explore. Each new story will be told with the same tools: the cutaway that absorbs the weight, the reset that clears the table, the format that ensures next week starts fresh. What the show cannot do is pretend it does not have a position. Even when it contradicts itself, even when it undoes what it previously built, the pattern of choices it makes across 24 seasons adds up to something: a worldview, a set of beliefs about what substances do, who they do it to, and what the difference is between a drinking problem and a drinking personality. __quote_18__. That worldview is what the final section is about, because when you lay all 12 of these stories side by side, the cocaine, the beer, the crack, the AA meeting, the marijuana, the Adderall, the painkillers, the hangover at sea, the Mr. Booze performance, the wine glass, the two contradictory portraits of sober Peter, a consistent argument emerges from underneath all of them. Family Guy has been making the same case about addiction since season 3. It has never stated it directly. It has never put it in a character's mouth as a clean thesis, but it is there, running through every episode, and once you see it, the whole series looks different. Section 12. What Family Guy actually believes about addiction. A show with a worldview it won't admit. Here is what Family Guy believes about addiction. It believes that substances are not the problem. It believes that the problem was already there before the substance arrived, and that the substance is just the most recent thing a person found to manage it. It believes that some people need what the substance gives them more than they need to be free of it. And it believes, quietly, consistently, across more than 20 years of television, that the real question is never whether a person uses something, but whether the something is using them back. The show has never said any of this out loud. It has never put these words in a character's mouth, or built an episode around
stating them directly, but run every addiction story this show has ever told through these beliefs, and every single one of them fits. The cocaine arc, the AA episode, the crack scene, the Adderall story,
The opioid episode,
the conversation on the boat, all of it, from season 3 to season 20, is built on the same foundation. Start with Peter. Peter drunk is louder, messier, more dangerous, and more himself than Peter sober. Death confirmed this in season 9, episode 10, Friends of Peter G, when he showed Peter both possible futures, and Peter rejected both extremes. The abusive drunk was a monster. The sober stranger was someone nobody in Quahog would recognize or want to spend time with. Death's conclusion, drink in moderation, was the show landing on its actual position. Not that drinking is good, not that Peter should stop, that for this specific person, the substance is so woven into who he is that removing it entirely removes him along with it. This is a real thing that happens to real people. The show understood it and said so through a cartoon version of Death in 2011. That understanding is the clearest statement of the show's worldview that any episode has ever produced. Now look at Brian. Brian's cocaine addiction in The Thin White Line was not about the cocaine. The episode built its entire first act around Brian being empty, purposeless, directionless, unable to locate a reason to get out of bed with any real energy behind it. The cocaine filled that space. It gave him momentum when nothing else had. When the cocaine went away, the emptiness stayed, which is why the wine glass never left his hand across the following 20 seasons. The wine is not a habit. It is a maintenance strategy for a gap that the show established in season 3 and never filled with anything else. The Adderall in season 14 fits the same pattern from a different angle. Brian did not take Stewie's medication to get high. He took it because Meg told him it makes you more productive, and Brian has spent his entire life believing that his problem is output rather than quality. The medication gave him the feeling of solving that problem. 2,000 pages written.
a full universe constructed in a basement. The sensation of being, finally, the writer he had always told himself he was.
George R.R. Martin took that sensation apart in Hartford with one sentence. The drugs did not make you write well. They just made you write a lot. This is the show's worldview applied to Brian's specific situation. The substance gave him the feeling of solving his problem without solving the problem. The gap between who Brian believes he is and what he has actually built is still there after the Adderall wears off. The pills did not close it. They just made him comfortable enough to stop noticing it for a while. This is what the show believes substances do. They manage the gap. They do not close it. And the difference between a person who uses something and a person who is being used by something is whether they know that distinction and can live inside it without losing themselves. Lois in season 20 is the show's clearest depiction of what happens when someone crosses that line. She was not empty the way Brian is empty. She was not using pills to feel like a better version of herself the way Peter uses beer to feel more connected to his friends. She was exhausted. She was the person who holds everything together, and the pills were the first thing she found that let her put the weight down. The episode called Prescription Heroin ended with the quiet implication that she was already looking for the next way to feel what the pills had given her, which is the show acknowledging that the need does not end when the specific substance ends. Meg's story in season 16, episode 8, Crimes and Meg's Demeanor, is the show demonstrating that the line can be avoided if someone shows you where it is before you cross it. Peter's conversation with Meg on the boat is the most direct statement of the show's worldview that any character delivers to another. He told her she did not need the drinking, because what the drinking gave her, the confidence, the room's attention, the looseness, was already in her without it. He could see this because he knew what it looked like when it was not true. He knew what it looked like when a person genuinely needed what the drinking gave them, because he was that person, and Meg was not. The show has been drawing this line since the beginning. Some people are using, some people are being used. Peter needs the beer to be Peter. Brian needs the wine to perform being Brian. Lois needed the pills to put the weight down. Meg needed one evening of being noticed, and then did not need it again. These are different situations, and the show treats them differently, even when the surface behavior looks the same. What it has never done is say this clearly. The worldview is embedded in the structure of the stories, rather than stated in any of them. You have to watch all 12 of these episodes and hold them next to each other before the argument becomes visible. The show trusts, or perhaps just hopes, that someone will do exactly that. Brian Griffin was named Stoner of the Year by High Times magazine in 2009. He was the first animated character to receive that award. The Venezuelan government banned Family Guy from local networks because of the 420 episode, with the Justice Minister calling it a promotion of drug use. The Parents Television Council listed Family Guy as their worst TV show of the week more than 40 times across the show's
show's run, largely because of how it handled substances, language, and dark subject matter.
Seth MacFarlane won an Emmy for his voice work in Pilling Them Softly, the Adderall episode. These external reactions all treated individual episodes as isolated positions. The award givers, the government officials, the watchdog groups, none of them were looking at the pattern underneath the episodes. They were responding to single moments, single songs, single scenes, and drawing conclusions about what the show believed based on those moments alone. The pattern tells a different story. The pattern says that Family Guy has been working through the same question since season 3 and has never finished answering it. The question is not whether addiction is bad. Every episode in this series acknowledges, somewhere inside it, that substances cost people things. Brian left rehab before finishing, Peter died drunk and needed death to give him a second chance, Lois nearly drowned her infant son for a pill at the bottom of a toilet. The cost is never hidden.
The question is what you do with the cost. Whether it is possible to use something without being consumed by it. Whether the line between managing a need and being controlled by one can be walked without falling off either side. Death said yes in season 9. Moderation is possible. Peter has the willpower to put the bottle down sometimes. The show meant this when it said it. It also, 14 years later in season 23, produced an episode that treated sober Peter as a problem and drinking Peter as the solution, which is the show losing its footing on exactly the line it once said could be walked. Family Guy has 455 episodes and 24 seasons of history as of March 2026. It has told addiction stories across almost every season of its run. It has been honest in some of them and evasive in others. It has used the cutaway to absorb consequence and the episodic reset to clear the table, and the format to ensure that no single position ever fully takes hold. But underneath all of that, underneath the seagulls drunk on discarded beer and the fort made of unsold books and the musical numbers and the resets, there is a show that understands something true about why people use substances and what it costs them and what the difference is between a person who is managing and a person who is lost. It just never quite found the courage to say it plainly. And maybe that is the most honest thing about Family Guy of all. It knows more than it admits. It always has. It hides the real argument inside the joke, buries the true feeling under the cutaway, and trusts that somewhere out there, someone will watch carefully enough to find what it left. You just spent a long time watching carefully enough, and now you have found it. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.